Welcome to our Hangout series, Innovation by Design. This is designed for innovation, design thinking, and IoT design leaders to share what's working for them, as well as the tips that can make others more successful. Today, our Hangout topic is designing smart connected products in the age of augmented reality, or AR as many people call it. With technology always changing, it can be difficult to stay on top of the latest ways to move your design forward. Today, we will be discussing ways businesses are incorporating augmented reality into smart connected design and how you can too. And therefore, we have expert panelists in this area who I want to go ahead and introduce, and then we'll jump in to hear what they have to say. First, we have Dave Braverman. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
Dave is Senior Digital Product Manager at Stanley Black & Decker. Dave is focused on helping the 174-year-old S&P 500 company extend its leadership in mechanical electrical products to those products that take full advantage of the emerging Internet of Things, or IoT. In his current role, Dave defines success as connecting previously unconnected products and developing exceptional digital solutions that drive productivity and efficiency across a wide variety of industries for customers around the globe. So as you can see, perfect fit for what we're talking about in today's topic. So thanks, Dave, for joining. And next we have Sam Murley. Sam is Digital Acceleration Leader at GE. Hey, Sam.
Hello.
And as a technology integrator, futurist, and entrepreneur, Sam has been pushing the limits of emerging technology for over 10 years. He currently manages the GE Environmental Health and Safety Emerging Technology portfolio, facilitating open innovation to identify, deploy, and scale technologies such as biometric wearables, augmented reality, virtual personal assistants, smart sensors, and artificial intelligence. So perfect background for today. Very good to have you, Sam.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And Ryan, we have Ryan Boyles, who is Senior Social Media Strategist at IBM for Watson Internet of Things. Ryan is focused on helping clients, partners, and business leaders understand how cognitive and the IoT are changing lives around the world and in the workplace with augmented intelligence. In his current role, Ryan leads social media and brand engagement across worldwide marketing for Watson IoT. Ryan's also a public speaker and a ranked IoT influencer with 20 years of experience in software design, development, and marketing. Welcome, Ryan.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
As you can hear, we've got a lot of expertise to share today from our panelists. So thank you all for listening in, and let's jump to what you're really here for. First, I should probably tell you that I am Gretchen Hoffman, Vice President of Marketing at Altitude. Altitude's a design and innovation consulting firm. We were acquired by Accenture this year, and we're focused on product innovation and design. We're based in Boston. We have clients like Under Armour, Nike, Colgate, DeWalt, Thermo Scientific, to name a few. And my role today is moderator. So let's get into the panel dialogue. To kick it off, I think what would be really helpful is each of the panelists, and Ryan, let's go ahead and start with you, really shares what is augmented reality and how is it different from virtual reality, and relate this to IoT design.
Okay, great. So I'm very practical, nuts and bolts kind of guy. So I think of this in very simple terms. So when you have some sort of user interface like your phone, let's say, that everybody has in their pocket, augmented reality is the ability to superimpose images, perhaps over a camera view of the world, versus virtual reality is really more about constructing a completely virtual model of a world that you would interact with in a sort of different way. So I think there's a subtle distinction there that maybe gets lost in the mainstream media. But when it comes to design, I think AR is very exciting, and there's tons of potential for it.
Great point. Dave, do you want to add?
Sure. I agree wholeheartly. The way that I like to describe it is there's two realms. There's the real world and there's a virtual world. And I think Ryan did a great job in describing the virtual world. So therefore, augmented reality is anything that's in between. It's placing virtual objects into the real world or it could also be looked at as placing real world objects into a virtual world, depending on how much is virtualized. So it's one of these where I think the mainstream media likes to refer to it mixed media. I think there's lots of different terms. I personally take the broader view of augmented reality as anything in between a completely virtual world and a completely real physical world that we live in today. And it's the intermix of those.
Yeah, excellent. And Sam, I know we've already heard a fair amount, but is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think Ryan and Dave are spot on. When I think of AR, something that I immediately related to the first time I saw it was the pop-up books that we had as kids, right? You open up this book and stuff pops out, and it was very similar for me to kind of think of it in that way. But right, I think Ryan, you said superimposing information. You as a user experiencing AR, you still see your surroundings, you still see your physical environment, but now you've got kind of digital assets and information popping up in front of you, where VR is completely closed off, full simulation. And kind of one thread just to add in there, I think there's something else maybe as well that's valuable called assisted reality. It's not quite fully immersive as AR. Something like Google Glass or heads-up display, I think that's still pretty valuable as well as part of this discussion.
Yeah, very much. Well, I'm interested to hear some of the stories that you guys have seen related to this. So Sam, while we have you there, talk a little in terms of where will we be seeing AR used in IoT products in the future?
Yeah, I think we're at this tipping point. We've been talking about this and folks in industry as well. Kind of this explosion. We're almost to this tipping point where AR will probably be the way we interface with the IoT in the future. Whether we're using AR to wayfind versus a Google Map or Apple Maps. I think in the enterprise and with IoT, the value that we're really going to find and where this probably is going to go is being able to interface directly with machine information and other data coming off assets. So when we think of AR, we can really think of that as the next interface beyond computer screen, keyboard, mobile screens, to really bring us into that data and information to help us contextualize it.
Yeah. Dave, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I would add that the concept of a screen, and everything in the future is going to be, I won't say everything, most things, a lot of things in the future can be viewed as screens. So think about, you mentioned the heads-up display in a car and the maps. I mean, that's where I see all the glass that we have around us. I see all the glass that's in a car, in your house. A lot of those are going to become, if you will, screens, to where you will have this information, this IoT-based cloud information, like a heads-up display in the car. You won't need the navigation in a separate screen. In your windshield will be overlaid the arrows telling you which lane you should be in and when to turn. And it just becomes a natural part of your world. And I think that's part of what this is bringing this data and information and the things that are part of this cloud into your world in such a way that it's almost seamless. It just seems like it belongs there.
So it'll be able to tell us all how to be a great driver. Be safer on the road. We'll see. So Ryan, any additional comments there?
Yeah, I want to get more into this with some use cases when we get into some of the other questions. But my comment here is that it really, jumping off of what Sam was saying, you've got to think about it in terms of the user interface. So there's all this discussion about voice being the user interface, and one of the really key points about Internet of Things and with just UX in general is with voice interaction or other means of interacting with a computer or what have you. There's this notion that as soon as the interface becomes invisible, it becomes natural. And I think that's a nice sort of fantasy, but you're going to need this augmented reality layer to really be productive in a number of different scenarios. especially in the workplace. So, to do your job, out in the field in certain industries, voice is not good enough, even if it's natural. So you're going to need this extra layer of information, and you're also going to need it to be really easy to use, to be productive. So I think that's really the promise and the challenge for AR.
Very true. Dave,
if I could add on to one thing that Ryan just mentioned, I think that's really key is that, and it's a bit of a tangent, but into when we talk about voice and everyone is seeing this as the panacea, and I think augmented reality is viewed in some of the same way. You have to think about the downfalls of it. Today we talk about people walking around, everyone's looking down at their phone, walking into things, putting themselves in harm's way, traffic accidents. Imagine being on a subway car or a plane where if voice was the primary method of interaction, all of the sound pollution that you would have of everybody trying to talk. Or in your house, if you're in one room talking to your TV and your wife is in the kitchen talking to Alexa, getting some type of cooking instructions. And I think that's going to hold true the same for augmented reality. And it's going to be a slippery slope of how it's implemented and how are you going to gather that information. Augmented reality through a mobile device is just the beginning. But just imagine now, instead of people looking down at their phones and walking while trying to figure out Google Maps, they're holding it up in the front of their face and they're walking. I mean, that is even one step further removed from social interaction. Now I actually literally have a physical device in front of my face screening me from everyone else. So I think that's one of the things where, when we look at the products and talk about IoT and the products that we definitely need to focus on is not just always the positive and the excitement behind it, but the realistic implications down the road of what that means as things are accepted and integrated into our life.
Yeah, it's interesting, Dave. So you've referenced the future and started to give us a picture, right, of what may happen. So can you talk a little, how far is the future that we're talking when we're considering AR connected products and the momentum we're getting from them?
So I think, AR Kit by Apple, that gives anywhere between 100 million and 400 million people, somewhere in there, access to a higher level of augmented reality through a mobile device than they've ever had. Google switched from what they used to have called Project Tango to now AR Core, I believe is what they're calling it, and Android throughout the world is a much more popular device. So now you're talking about software not relying necessarily upon hardware to start to get into the AR world. So I think that the use cases that those support and the products that they benefit, for example, measuring room dimensions, things along those lines, I think are right around the corner. The true value of augmented reality, in my opinion, I'm probably a little bit of a I can't think of the word that I'm looking for, but a naysayer in the immediate acceptance of this. I think 3 to 5 years is where you're really going to start to see the value of augmented reality when some of the technology challenges are overcome. If you're not using mobile devices, then you're looking at either monocular displays or binocular displays. So either things like the Vuzix with the one lens over your eye, like Google Glass, or a HoloLens type of, or ODDG, which are glasses. That's just not going to be mainstream. I mean, it's great for from industrial applications and enterprise applications, but you're not going to get the general populace that doesn't wear glasses to wear glasses all day, every day. So I think that's further out. I think there's some technology that's using different ways to use light to where you don't necessarily need any type of special lenses to be able to see this augmented world, if you will, this virtual world overlaid and superimposed in the real world. So that's where I think the real value, 3 to 5 years. I think you'll see some really cool applications coming out in the next, month to 18 months. A lot of those are going to be limited to mobile devices.
Yeah, it's interesting. We all wish we had our crystal ball, right? I know as we're trying, the topic of this, designing smart connected products, in the age of AR. And, we're all trying to figure out what do we need to design next to be more competitive. And, are we going to beat that 3 to 5 mile or, year window? It's going to be very interesting to see how much changes. So, hey, Ryan, you had mentioned stories earlier, and really, how do you see every day changing from your perspective? Again, including the designing aspect too, right? And can you give some visionary examples of how we do things today that may change, some additional ones?
Certainly. Well, with in IBM, we're certainly trying to push some boundaries with, I guess, how the workplace is changing, how you interact with your fellow employees, how you interact with the building itself. So there's sort of product use cases and there's operations use cases that we look at, right? And so when it comes to design, it's a matter of with the Internet of Things, all those points of data that you're going to be collecting, and then what do you do with that? And then launching off what David was talking about is, where does that processing take place? Like how are you going to make that available and put it into a usable interface with AR? And I think the form factor, is a big discussion here. Is that going to be your phone? Is it going to be something like Google Glass? Google Glass is viewed by some as visionary and some as an abject failure. So you have to look at, there's work being done by a company named Daiquiri, who's building a smart helmet that's meant for an industrial setting. So when you're out in the field in a oil refinery, and you need to interact with that environment, and there's safety issues, and you also just need the horsepower to sort of process all of the data in that environment. A lot of that, it'd be nice to be connected to the cloud or by radio or by cell, but you might not be if you're in one of these extreme environments or if you're out servicing equipment. So I think when it comes to design, it's got to be purpose built, right? So there's a lot of work being done for specific use cases that I think are fascinating, like that one where it's going to change the way we do work. Or the other form factor is, will the AR display be captured by a drone in the field? So we're doing work with partners where the person isn't physically there. A drone is going into the field to make an observation of maybe a cell phone tower or a structure. And then, much like the military is using them for a completely different purpose, but they're being used for a purpose of looking at safety or looking at, other use cases that are used to put people in harm's way or be very time consuming or costly for service providers.
Yeah. Do you think, Ryan, are there any specific verticals, that you're thinking are like winning the game in AR, making the most noise? And if so, really, who will have the most success designing smart connected products with AR? I mean, obviously, crystal ball here.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to pin down one. I think there's so much experimentation going on. There is the use case that I just mentioned around going in the field, I think is, for me, it's going to change the way that we, for example, airlines with how they need to keep the fleet ready, right? Or do repair work or do all sorts of things around, areas that you have to be concerned about uptime and safety. I think those are the areas where you're going to see the immediate payoff, both from the operational budget and from a productivity standpoint. So for me, I look at those and it seems boring. It seems like it's in the, it's something that the normal everyday consumer doesn't see, but it's going to improve. If just imagine if Delta could improve their, on-time factor from, 75% in a certain airport to 95%. That's, those are headlines right now that are being made where consumers are frustrated. So the use cases where a company like that can, not only operate more efficiently, but ultimately make their customers happy, that's where the real wins are going to be made, I think.
Dave, any thoughts there?
Yeah, training and service are going to be really big. There's in the industrial world and factories, as well as out in the construction site, there are training manuals of old, which is how companies used to get support out to someone. You have a manual, and then it went to phones, and you could call up someone and get support that way. Now what you're able to do with augmented reality is literally have them see the world through the eyes of their customer in the field to be able to diagnose and repair. And you talk about uptime. If we look at automotive manufacturers, there's a stat that's out there. I don't have a reference for it. It's basically for every minute the Ford F-150 production line is down, it costs Ford $10,000. And it's based, if you do the math based off the car costs and all this stuff. So don't quote that as a fact, as more as a directional. The amount of money that just being down means to an automotive manufacturer, and being able to get that equipment back up as fast as possible. And when a service technician or a line technician can't fix whatever the problem is, to be able to put on one of these devices, whether it's a daiquiri helmet, whether it's a HoloLens, to put that on and then have a service technician literally seeing what they're seeing and basically controlling the hands of the person that's on the lines. Okay, this is what I want you to look for. Okay, you see that? Let's turn that. No, not that way. Let's turn it this way. And they're interacting and drawing right in the field of vision of the person that's standing there is tremendous. So I do think service and training are huge. They're not necessarily industries, but they're aspects of industries. And where those aspects have major impact, those are the industries. In that manner, I think that you will start to see augmented reality really making a difference to the bottom line and the operations, and then ultimately to the financial benefit of these companies.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think what we're all talking about can, if you really think about it, can seem scary too, right? I mean, we're talking about, can AR basically do the driving for us, or, give us a lot of instruction, and but there's also a lot of talk on ethical concerns too, right? On where we could need to consider that for AR. And Sam, I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about the ethical concerns to keep in mind with the AR products, and do we really fully grasp what's happening here?
It's definitely an area of importance. When we launched our smart eyewear and augmented reality pilots over the course of the past 2 years, we've got dozens of GE businesses, dozens of groups, supply chain, manufacturing, field service, engineering groups. And before we could really launch all of that, we had to take a step back and say, hold on a sec, what do we need to check first? What are some of those concerns? And luckily, we were able to piggyback off of, kind of standard recording in the workplace procedures, and procedures that, give guidance around microphone and camera enabled devices. But I think this is a lot different than that. So a few things that we talk about all the time for every IoT project, whether it's AR or a combination of AR with other technology, is data privacy. What data is getting captured, whether it's active or passive. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're deploying an AR experience. Let's say it's a assembly line use case. What other information is being picked up in the background on the assembly line, maybe next to the one where this is being deployed? Is that IP? Is that customer information? Are you picking up faces? What type of documentation is laying around that should not be recorded? So we talk about that a lot. We talk about the use of the data, and for these use cases with AR, even virtual reality as well, the actionable use of that data for decision making, increased knowledge transfer, productivity gains, quality safety gains, that's the goal. But there could be incorrect uses of that data beyond those use cases as well. So just some things that we've done, kind of best tips, best practices. We put in a global policy for wearables at GE, and then for each and every bucket of IoT program that we deploy and roll out globally, we call it like the framework or the roadmap. There's a FAQ and guidance document that talks about what this is, what it's not, who has access to the data, where that data is going, what's being done with that data, and what's being captured specifically and why. And then we also create a one-page tool talk, do's and don'ts. So it's a consolidated view of that FAQ and guidance document that can be pushed out and posted on a site. It can be sent out to users beforehand. So I don't think we've got it fully grasped. I don't know if anyone can say that they do yet, because it's still maturing and evolving. But I think the initial bumpers, if you will, that we have put in place have put us in a good position to scale up here in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've mentioned crystal ball a few times. I mean, I'm obviously asking you guys to predict, right? And thank you for taking some risk and being willing to do that. You know, we also hear. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ryan.
Would you mind? You sparked something in me that I wanted to touch on that one as well, just really quick. I almost liken that point about having that strategy or those guidelines. I think that's very smart. I think I liken that back to when social media was a new thing, and then we got our smartphones, and then there had to be a lot of policies put in place in the workplace around use of that, both professionally and personally, and how all that stuff kind of munges together a little bit in the middle. And so companies like mine, like IBM, we were very, I think, smart in the early days to put those kind of guidelines in place for employees, both with how they should act in public as a person and as a IBM representative. So I think that's really smart. But I think these guidelines also have to address sort of the fact that the data privacy side of it, you really have to think of it in terms of, lifespan. All those things are very complicated, right? And they're becoming more complicated because ultimately AR and detect all the sensor data from IoT, essentially, it's going to create so much more data that it makes that sort of difficult problem exponentially bigger to manage. And so I think that's really one of the other challenges is, like, in the back office, you can have a policy, but it's how do you execute that as well.
I think I agree 100%. I think part of that too is giving enough flexibility to those types of policies for local decision making for plants and sites and specific GE businesses, in our case, to make decisions and have ownership of how to roll that out, because there's not a one size fits all, one policy that fits all for everyone and for every use case. So it's definitely been a balance for us to put the right structure in place, but not put so much structure that you're really obliterating the opportunity for the value when deploying technology. Right. So I agree 100%.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're talking about, things, frankly, we need to be cautious about as we're, looking at this big shift. But, you hear some people say, well, wait, there's a lot of risks. And the topic of this is design. So Ryan, can you talk a little bit on, are there safeguards or additional things people should think about as they're designing using AR?
Well, I wanted to make a comment earlier that I think applies to this, which is your goals for design are ultimately, of course, need to be in service of the user. I think you need to have that user first mentality with your design approach. But that's sort of a generic way of saying, make people happy or make people productive. I think with AR and with IoT, one of the challenges is that there's really a fear on the side of the actual users themselves, and I think that could actually be multiplied in the workplace more so even than in the consumer side, because it's sort of like they want a rule book, they want to make sure they're not gonna mess up. So IBM has really started to use the language of what we call augmented intelligence. And that's sort of a cutesy way of saying that AI is not here to sort of replace you. It's here to help you. And I think you need that same mentality with AR, right? Because it's taking the notion of having, all this data or machine learning or sort of, deep computing on the back end and sort of giving it to you in this new way. that frankly is going to be very daunting for employees to manage unless that user interfaces has really specific parameters with what they can and can't do. Because if you just open up all the feature set, mistakes can be made, and going back to some of those earlier use cases, it could create a dangerous situation. So I really think you have to have that user-centric mindset so that you can make sure that you're not getting into gray area where it's sort of a dangerous situation with what power you're going to give an employee, and are they going to use it in the right way.
Yeah, I think the power is something that everyone will be watching very closely as we evolve here. I mean, that's, the consumer wants to feel they own their own information, right? And, how far can companies take it?
And I think your point about what safeguards should there be, I think you have to plan for those in your product design up front. You can't sort of bolt that on. Those are things with this technology that really need to be the core approach to how you're going to put this stuff on screen and define that interaction between that digital environment and the physical world.
Yeah, absolutely. Sam, is there anything you want to add? I know you've talked a little about that, but about the risks or anything that should be considered for designers?
Yeah, I think the user-centric approach, that's something that I was thinking of. I think it's understanding the environment, the use case, how the user is going to use it in the environment, right? So for example, devices that are binocular or completely kind of cover your view per se may not be the right device for a wind turbine technician, right? Because that user is going to need an unobstructed view when climbing up that wind tower. So I think doing kind of a broad brush on the sites where you want to deploy, how you want to deploy makes sense. Because I think, on the flip side, binocular devices are great where there's less risk, right? So there's just trade-offs one way or the other. I think IoT though, inherently, there's additional safeguards that are going to be unlocked, right? So you think about at GE, right? We're rolling out predicts. Now we can sensorize, we can wire up and turn on wind turbines and other assets that we create, right? Well, now you've got this information stream that you can feed to an end user about what's going on with that asset and potentially things that could harm them. So I think one, it's, how could the interface, when you look at this, how can the interface potentially introduce new risk? But then also the IoT stack itself, what information can we pull from IoT to alert the end user in the event there's an unknown hazard within their environment? So I say all of that should be done in the form of a pilot to start. If you're unsure one way or the other, pilot. Grab a group of stakeholders who are interested and try it out in a very, very controlled environment and go less controlled as you go. So I'd say always pilot, always try before you go into full production, so you understand what those safeguards need to be and what those new risks could be.
Yeah, great, excellent points. Ryan, it looks like either you need a refresh or we can't see you quite as clearly, but can you hear us? Okay.
Yes,
all right.
I'm
so
still here.
At least we can hear. So a couple things just to make sure on the folks listening in, we will be sure to take your questions. I see the questions being submitted. Be sure to vote for those you want to make sure we get to in the Ask a Questions tab. Also, if you can take the polls, that's always helpful for us to know who we're addressing answers to. And we will take those in about a little less than 10 minutes. All right. So a few more questions here for our panelists. Dave, let's pull you back into the conversation here. How do you know when or if your company's IoT efforts are really ready for AR? I mean, I see some folks are not heavily involved in AR yet. So how would they know when they should be? Is there like a checklist that they could use or something that would help guide them?
So I think, the conversation about the customer perspective and the customer focus is spot on. I think that's probably the first question that any company needs to ask is their customer ready to utilize some sort of augmented reality in whatever environment they're in, and then the problem that they're solving. And I think that's a foundational question. And if you can answer yes to both of those, then I think you need to look at your internal capabilities. AR is much more complex than it appears to be. You have 3D models, and you need someone that can work with 3D models, and in a lot of places there's just not that skill set around that folks can do that. But then you get even further than just the 3D modeling when you start getting into the different layers where you need textures and you need lighting reflection to be able to, you need these reflection layers. So the design, as we were talking about design, it's a whole new skill set for design. It's not just the web designer that has transitioned to mobile, learned a few new things. And I don't believe that it's the mobile designer that's going to be able to just learn a few new things in design in the augmented reality world. I think there's a lot of very specific elements that need to be considered, and it's that person may be able to do it for sure, but it will take a different set of skills. It's not just the artistic and the heuristics and the visual layout of it. There's so much more that needs to come into play with hardware. So I think that's one, 3D models. You need to decide the types of devices that are out there, the costs that are involved. You need the software engineering, and then you need someone to manage this whole thing with the content or asset, however you want to consider 3Ds. It's hard to say asset when it's a virtual chair that you're managing in cyberspace that'll be reflected in someone's real world. But whether you say that's a content or whether you say it's an asset, that stuff needs to be managed, updated, changed. So I think as a company, if you're going to get into this and you're ready to start doing this, you need to look at your skill set across the board, see what you might have capabilities in, both short-term and ongoing, because much like everything in digital, it's not a one and done. Right? The physical world, a lot of it was one and done. When I go through the tooling process and I put something on the shelf, it's on the shelf, and I've produced 1 million of them. I can go back and maybe make iterations, but then I'll have new tooling processes and have to do another 1 million. Well, we all know in software that's just not true. You can make these quick, real-time iterations and changes and updates, and it's expected. And it's the same thing in in the augmented reality world, where this ongoing improvements are going to be just expected. I think to give an example, and then I'll be quiet here, but to give an example, using that wind farm, I think when you talk about using the sensor data, I just am imagining someone who's in charge of a wind farm, somebody who's out there, and they're getting an iPad that can tell them that the vibration levels on certain turbines are too high, but they're trying to figure out in this giant field of green, blue sky, and white giant wind turbines, which one of the 150 that are out there is the one that has this vibration issue. Well, imagine the world with augmented reality where all I'm doing is putting on, either monocular or binocular glasses like a HoloLens or something, and I'm looking out, and suddenly the one that's showing the vibration is red. I now know exactly where that is, but then I see other problems that I'm not even thinking about that would put me in harm's way. Well, that design and your ability to support that is what you need to think about as a company, because that's not just typical software design. That's, what hardware, what information is going to be relevant to that person that's not, that's part of the use case for them, right? The use case isn't I want to show them just vibration. I need to take care of that person and understand what their job is. Their job isn't to just fix a vibration. Their job is to keep the turbines up and running at maximum, efficiency. So you need to think about all that information that would be there and their physical, nature. Don't put something on that could get blown off if there's wind around you, right? And that's different skill sets. So I think that's something, again, to kind of wrap it up, that companies need to think about now, are that vast difference in skill set that augmented reality really does require. It's out there, and I think it'll continue to evolve, but it's not something that you probably have ready in your organization unless you've made a decision to get into this.
Yeah, no, excellent. Sam, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think, like I said at the top of the call, there's this notion of, or the technology of full spatial augmented reality, and then there's kind of the sibling or the brother or sister of assisted reality, right? And I think how you were talking about it, Dave, that transition, it may be easier with the resources that are currently available to move into more assisted reality technology and then continue to migrate or morph into true spatial augmented reality. So a lot of the skill sets that are available today for web and mobile, those will probably transition easier into heads-up display assisted reality versus, to Dave's point, I need to take this million poly CAD file and crunch it down into 15,000 polys, but it's still got to look accurate and be spot on. I mean, that takes time. That's hard to do. I think that's the evolving resource need for sure. I would say kind of that you asked about a checklist. I don't know if we have a checklist per se. I mean, we look for productivity and risk reduction. And if we can find both within a use case, it's kind of the sweet spot for us. But something we do, I just wanted to throw out there, is we use something like the business model canvas. So it's a single slide. It's got about 9 boxes, but it's our pilot foundational document and our future roadmap. And if we can't fill out about half of those boxes from the start, that's kind of our internal checklist to go back, do more work, revise. So that pilot model canvas covers everything from potential ROI, key metrics we're going to track, how it's done today, how we plan to do it with AR or assisted reality, who's the demographic, what's their skill set, what's their background. And if we can't, from the beginning, kind of create this symbiotic plan, I'll say, then that's just, we got to go back and do more work and revise. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well for folks listening.
Okay, thanks, Sam. And Ryan, do you have anything you'd like to briefly add on the checklist? I want to make sure we still have time to get to the audience questions because I see quite a few coming in.
No, let's just leave it at that. I don't think I have anything fantastic to add to that one.
Well, let's do one curveball here, and then we'll go into the summary, and then we'll get to the questions. So, Ryan, we've talked a little bit about, where you get information from, who should you be listening to. Can you help the audience know a little bit more in terms of, like, who are you following? How are you learning more on AR as relates to, IoT products? And are there any specific, like, industry experts, insiders, whose opinions you really respect?
Yeah, there's. I came with a list of 2 or 3, and I wanted to preface it though with the fact that I tend to, because of my technical development background, I tend to, I don't want to follow just the talking heads who are kind of, you can tell the folks that they talked about big data, then they started talking about IoT, now they're talking about AR. The kind of, I think there's a place for that. But I love to follow the people that are making things or doing things with it, because they're the ones that are breaking stuff and seeing how it works. So I wanted to give a shout out to one of my colleagues. I know it's a shameless plug, but
go for it.
Matthew Michael, and it's spelled Mikel, is one of my colleagues who is working on what I think is something really fascinating around what's called the digital twin. And I don't know if you understand that concept, but it's the notion of taking the physical world and the digital world and mapping those and applying it to a lot of the industry use cases that we've talked about, and doing that across not just product design, but the operations and the maintenance and the whole life cycle, what we call continuous engineering cycle of a product. So I'll paste his name here in the chat. The other person that I really quite enjoy talking to is someone who can be described by she wears many hats, but most recently she became the new COO of Upload VR, and her name is Ann Ward. And so the reason I think that's significant is because she comes from kind of a mishmash of different backgrounds in the web world and SEO and robotics and all kinds of science related subjects, and now she's throwing herself into this into this world. And I think it's interesting just to see, how the mixed reality ecosystem is evolving. And I think that company in particular, even though, they've been in the news for different reasons recently, I think having her join, to focus on not only AR, but VR and the mixed reality ecosystem is going to be really interesting to follow. And she's a personal friend of mine out on the West Coast. So I would recommend you follow her as well.
Okay, excellent. I am going to move us along here because I see quite a few questions coming in from the audience, and I want to make sure to get to those. So first, I will let folks know that if you go to altitudeinc.com, we have a lot of free resources under Insights as well as under the work section. So I encourage you folks, and there will be a hangout on September 28th that will be referenced in the email you received Monday with this record, which will talk more about IoT, what's working, what's not. And I encourage you to attend that. But what I'd like to do right now is ask each panelist to share the top takeaways. Again, you can repeat what you've already said, but if you can briefly give a couple takeaways that you really want to make sure the audience remembers, hopefully everything they remember, but the key ones. I would love to just go around the horn and have you do that. And then I want to make sure to get to the audience's questions. Okay, so Dave, how about we start with you?
Sure, I have three. I would say it's more challenging than what you think. I would say that you need to look at the user problem and ensure any of the hardware and the solution is matching the user's problem and not being driven by technology. Don't look for a use case for a HoloLens, or don't look for a use case of augmented reality with a mobile device. Use them to solve a problem that the user is really having. And then the last is it's really early and things are going to change and things are going to evolve, and where we are is definitely not where we're going to be in 3 years and 5 years. And I can't even imagine the world in 10 years.
Excellent. I got to tell you, Dave, you have a lot of good insights. For the folks listening in, as a reminder, Dave is from Stanley Black & Decker. Incredible insights, clearly very involved in this area, and really appreciate having you on the panel. And we'll have you stay tuned till we get to the questions, okay? And then Sam from GE. Sam, if you can give us your summary takeaways, would love it.
Yeah, it's a great time to get started. The technology, the hardware, the software is mature enough now that if you've got even a threat of a use case or even a really strong use case or business case, you can get started pretty quickly. So I always say, don't hesitate, don't wait. Software and hardware is always going to change, but there are productivity gains, safety gains, and industry gains today that can be realized by using this technology. So it's a great time to get started. It's a great time to push through maybe your pilot into deployment or into phase 2 and pivot in the right way. The second thing is partner with folks in your organization, partner with folks outside your organization, whether it's you want to cross-check with, again, data privacy or IT teams. Partner with folks outside of your organization when it makes sense. There's a ton of great companies out there, new startups that are coming out every day that, instead of build and wait, you can partner, and again, try much more quickly. So, and then I think something that Dave said, I just wanted to reiterate is start with the use case. Don't start with the technology. Don't, like me, get infatuated sometimes with the tech. Really focus on the use case. Try and solve a problem and understand what that use case is. If you're trying to do something on the assembly line with AR, go to the assembly line. Go talk to the folks that run the assembly line. Go talk to the folks that work on that assembly line. It'll ensure greater chance of success.
Yeah, we're definitely hearing. I just heard both from Dave and Sam about user, right? It's user centric. Don't forget that when you're designing for AR or anything else, right? So thank you, and Sam, thank you. You have an excellent background. Great. Clearly very involved in this area already. So thank you very much for taking time to share. And then we'll jump to Ryan from IBM. Yeah,
well, I think I'm just repeating what both of you said. So user first, I'm all about that. I also think the point you just made, Sam, about partnerships is key. So one of the things that we're doing in IBM, just to give that color, is we definitely are big believers in that, obviously, but we are our IoT headquarters that we have in Munich, obviously focused on manufacturing, on lots of those industry use cases around what's termed as Industry 4.0. But what we've done there is we've set up a lab where our partners and even clients can come in and co-locate with us. So we're taking that partnership to kind of a new level where we want them to sit literally at the same table and help us design things, or help allow us to bring in our research folks or our solutions folks and try to come up with new things, right? And do some of these pilot use cases and just, build things that, frankly would be very difficult to do, in a remote scenario.
Ryan, you're clearly also very knowledgeable. It had to have been exciting working with Watson, and I very much appreciate your sharing and everything that you've shared on this Hangout. And now I'm going to move us into the audience's questions. Make sure we get to those. Okay, so first one, and for the panelists, just jump in if you have something you'd like to share. And what I'll probably do is just have one panelist briefly answer each so we can get to more questions, unless you have something really that you want to make sure share, jump in. Okay, so this first one, which quite a few people voted on here, who is doing a good job of monetizing AR? Who's integrating this with big data?
I'm going to give a silly answer and say Nintendo. But I'm not being too serious there. I think the monetization, I can't speak a lot to that on the outside, because like I said, most of these use cases that we look at are around optimization, in a B2B sense. So it's a little tricky for me to answer that one directly, which I'm trying to read the tone of this,
I also think it's hard, right? Because it's still early, and I think monetizing it, sure, there's data, everyone's trying to figure out how they can monetize and utilize data.
I mean, when I read monetize in that sense, I'm assuming it's more of a, you're talking about a consumer use case, which I think perhaps education, the next question around education, I think that is an area that's ripe for taking mobile apps to the next level with this sort of technology. I could certainly see how, that could be an application that would be not only beneficial, but, my personal observation of being the father of two teenagers that are in high school is that their technology is all over the map. They're trying new things every year, and the kind of, the IT department of your school system needs help. So this is where, you see these opportunities that are ripe for innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. You jumped to the next one, so I appreciate that, Ryan. Let me ask this one, because this is a topic on design, right? So we have one question here, which is, speaking of design, what's your advice to aspiring young designers to tap into AR, VR, and the IoT space? Ways to skill sets, experience, like Sam, you mentioned before on, how it really is, you need to have the right skill sets. I think Dave, you've mentioned it too. Can you talk about that a little bit more, particularly for folks getting into the space?
Sure. I highly recommend, if you're getting into the space or you've been in it for a little while, look at the Unity 3D platform. Unity 3D is basically the standard for AR, VR development from mostly consumer focused, but bleeds into the enterprise as well. It's extremely easy to start learning and understand, whether you're coming from a design background or a coding background or somewhere in between. Unity 3D, great free tool that you can download today. It comes with templates, it comes with free models. It's just a great tool to get up and going. So I think from how do I bring it all together? How do I package something up and deploy it out on any platform? It's a great way to get started and kind of build as you go.
And I would add on, I think for folks that are heavy in the digital space, to understand industrial design, and to, I think in the future, and for someone young, I think the blending of industrial design and what digital world would consider pure UX work, I think blending those two things together is a really strong future for the design. I don't think purely digital is just the way to go, and I don't think that pure industrial design without understanding the digital environment. So I think it's a blend of those two is really going to be a key. And the folks that I see coming out of schools like Georgia Tech, which is right down the street from us, they're really well positioned. They have a few courses that are blending those really, really strong.
Great answers. Appreciate it very much. I'm going to take a couple more questions. There's one here, which I think, Sam, you somewhat answered, but if there's anything you want to add, what are panelists' thoughts on how we can keep a balance between accessibility, voice control of everything around us aided by AR, and security? For example, recently, researchers confirmed that phones like Alexa, all devices, voice controlled, basically can be hacked by inaudible ultrasound commands. Are the panelists worried about the security issues that can arise when we integrate AR and connected devices?
Definitely. I think one of the key areas to focus on in terms of deploying this type of technology, again, it goes back to that partnership. Talk to your IT department, understand what security measures are in place, and understand if you can tap into those security measures. So, if you deploy and you don't tie off with the right folks for whatever reason, or you miss a key stakeholder, and you do have something happen, again, it just obliterates your whole business value and ROI that you could get. So I would say, again, partner, ask someone, colleague, even if you don't know, who do I need to link up with? Who do I need to cross-check this with? I think that's really important. So I think the over inundation of voice and visual interfaces, I think, Dave, you kind of summed that up pretty well. So again, I think it goes back to understanding what's at the site, what the end user is using today, simplifying work for them, not adding more tools in production. So again, understand the user perspective and partner, and I think you'll be in a good place.
Great. So let's take one more question. My question is about the current state of AR technologies. Are we ready to walk with or through AR avatars that help tell us which foods have low salt content or the right nutrition in the supermarket aisle? It would be timely as the fonts are getting smaller on all that packaging. So I think the question is, are we ready for that? I feel like maybe addressed from an avatar standpoint, but I feel like we've talked a little bit about what this is leading to.
My short answer would be, yeah, I think that's a great use case that could be explored in a CPG world, like a Procter & Gamble type of company, where you would have kind of a laugh. I'll do a nod for folks that have been around for a really long time, like me, the Clippy. If those remember Clippy from Microsoft days, we're kind of back to that, and you could definitely leverage something like that in grocery stores that do help you. The data is out there in the cloud for sure. Access to the data is available. I just think it's finding the right use case for that. But the technology is there, the data is there. I would argue that the need is there. Whether the need needs a problem, or whether the need requires a solution, would need more work, a business case, some thought behind it. Whether, not every problem needs a solution, but.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're at the top of the hour for folks. I absolutely want to thank our panelists. I do see some questions here asking about resources. So thank you for jumping in and some of the answers here, like Ryan. And also do feel free to go to Altitude's website, Altitude Inc. We welcome you to use any of our free resources. And I really, really appreciate all the panelists' insights and their time. And I thank the folks listening in for taking your time to hear what we had to say. So thank you all and enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.